There we go. Yeah. Joseph's camera isn't working. So Joseph has a disembodied voice for us, but we can hear you, which is great. So take it away.
I'm glad you can hear me. Sorry that you cannot see me. I apologize for that. Some technological challenges I'm having here. But so glad to be here. Thank you so much to you, Bishop Graham, for inviting me to be part of this exciting launch, and congratulations on publishing this book. I chose not to examine a specific chapter, but will attempt to give a brief review of the book. That's daunting, isn't it? At first, I did not find an obvious coherence until I read the book for a second time. A pleasant discovery of what holds the various chapters together came to me not from what Graham himself describes in the book, but a single sentence, the opening words of the foreword. David Ford, his words in the foreword, where he makes this perceptive observation, and I quote him: "The extraordinary, diverse chapters of this book feel like an embodiment of Graham King's imprint, characterized above all by energy and encouragement with connections in many directions." End of quote. This aptly describes what the whole book is all about. This discovery did not make my task any easier. I must admit that I found it a tough assignment to try and present a review of such comprehensive and extensive book in under 10 minutes. Deliberately, I chose to only point out a fascinating aspect of this book: multi-directional connections, which impacts mission in profoundly multiple ways. This is a story of God at work in and through our lives. Graham gives us great insight, informed by the mission of God, relayed to us through lived out missional experiences. It is about the earnest discernment and faithful exploration of what God is constantly calling us to do, joy of service and undertaking of collaborations, partnerships, friendships, hospitality, all together clarify God's role in his mission through us, while at the same time unveiling before us all but piecemeal and sometimes only imperfect and partial ways what mission is and mission is not. Three conceptual frameworks are intertwined and beautifully presented together, all in one sentence with profound clarity on the subject we are looking at this evening. In Graham's words, 1, unexamined mission is not worth living. 2, mission-seeking understanding is nourishing. And 3, there are always greater depths to be sought out. Wholesome mission is fulfilling, impactful, and always tentative as the calling and the leading of the Holy Spirit continually draws us into the progressive impact of the kingdom of God. Most of the chapters in this book speak to me at a very personal level. This is not just because I am mentioned in a chapter or two, and particularly the one on contextual theology and reading scripture in context, but also through Graham's experiences as a bishop, which resonates with my own experience. Uniqueness of the Anglican Episcopal position of a suffragan bishop or assistant bishop, as in my case, calls for creative interaction with those in authority, raising issues of how authority is shared, delegated and applied, and the whole complex interaction of authority and accountability. As Graham says, with regard to his transition from Islington to Sherborne, the shift from being vicar of a city parish in cosmopolitan London to being bishop of a see which covers the rural county of Dorset involved new cultural adjustments, which were stimulating and challenging. End of quote. I must admit that cultural adjustments always stretches our imagination as we negotiate at all levels of our being, spiritual, intellectual, physical, and social, and often even economical, as the realities of various and multidimensional levels of interactions confront us. This results in a situation in which none can sit back and do nothing. It cannot be described better than in the words Graham quotes regarding the spiritual crisis of one Janet Dempster. I have been reading about what wonderful Henry Martin, wearing himself out for other people, and I sit thinking of nothing but myself. I must go. A stimulating discussion arising out of this missional thrust is Graham's presentation on interreligious dialogue and interactions. Perhaps at the heart of his thesis on this subject is the prescriptive but cautious approach to evangelism. I summarize it here in the words he quotes from Max Warren that, quote, "Our first task is approaching another people, another culture, another choose. For the place we are approaching is holy. Else we may find ourselves treading on men's dreams. More serious still, we may forget that God was here before our arrival. We have then to ask what is the authentic religious content in the experience of the Muslim, the Hindu, the Buddhist, or whoever he may be." End of quote. This is deep and wise, but also calls for judicious interrogation. It presents, among other things, an accommodationist leaning respectful courtesy, dangerously dancing with pluralism. I find the conclusion to chapter 9 equally mind-provoking. Graham makes the observation that Jesus gives an absolution to the woman caught in adultery. Go your way, Jesus tells her, and from now on do not sin again. Jesus does not condemn nor condone, observes Graham. Here we see, yes, no condemnation or compromise, but there is a command, sin no more. Also a missional direction is offered, go your way. Graham then immediately points out our missional dilemma. I quote, "Now we do not have the authority that Jesus had to reinterpret the law. He was and is unique. Yet in our various contexts today, I believe he speaks to us through the parable of the prodigal son and through the event of the woman caught in adultery, saying, don't throw stones." Yes, our missional position is always tentative and progressive, sometimes precarious. But what do we make of the command, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go and make disciples of all nations"? How do we avoid the danger, the positive yet inhibiting cautiousness which can possibly hold us back in the belief that, after all, every faith is found on some holy ground? This caution perhaps also informs the fascinating thought that, I quote Graham again, God never meant there to be a church in Islington. God meant there to be an Islington in the church. How amazing. With due regard to all holy ground, including the church or Christianity, there lurks dreadful darkness and death, from which Jesus calls all into light and abundant life. There is, let's face it, too much of the world, darkness if you like, in the church, and too little of the church, light, if you like, in the world. Islington signifying the world. God never meant there to be a church in the world. God meant there to be the world to be in and under his kingdom. Where do we stop and remove our shoes? Show me a holy ground away from the presence of God, and I will show you the end of mission. Thank you. There I end my presentation also. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Joseph, and wonderfully punctual as well. Next up, we have Kirsteen Kim, who is the Professor of World Christianity at Fuller Theological Seminary, and is also the editor of the series in which Graham's book is published, Theology and Mission in World Christianity. Thank you, Kirsteen.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Graham and Muthuraj, for this kind invitation. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be part of this occasion, although by Zoom from California. First, as one of the editors of the series in which Nourishing Mission is published, I would like to add my congratulations to Graham on its publication. I notice also that our Brill editor, Tessel Jonquier, is here on Zoom. The series with Brill Publishers is called Theology and Mission in World Christianity, and my fellow editors are Stephen Bevans and Mika Ruokanen. Graham's is the 21st volume in a series that is flourishing, so Steve, Mika and I have plenty of proposals to read and discuss. Most of them gravitate particularly to one of the three key words in the series title. But this volume excited us because it ticks all the boxes and effortlessly interweaves all three themes. It is thoroughly mission-oriented and theologically, not to mention liturgically framed, while also traversing world Christianity. In fact, I would argue that Graham's work sits precisely at the intersection of theology, mission, and world Christianity. Like an Orthodox theologian referring to the persons of the Trinity, Graham never writes about one without mentioning the other two. Other reasons that Graham's volume was attractive to us were its innovative approaches to theology and its constructive approach to mission. I checked back through my emails to find some of the things we said about the book. It is stimulating, interesting, and enthusiastic about mission. Another quote, it is careful, thoughtful, and insightful. And then it is inspiring and encouraging, lifting up the spirit of the readers. From Brill's point of view, it was an advantage that Graham is so well connected globally. So this publication would draw attention to the series as a whole. Graham was already thinking ahead by suggesting how it could be promoted. Mind you, that made it hard to find reviewers because most of the names that came up were already listed for potential endorsements. Secondly, on a more personal note, reading this book brought back memories of when I worked for and with Graham as the administrator of what was then the Henry Martyn Centre, now the Cambridge Centre for Christianity Worldwide, which is setting 2 in the book. I recall the portraits of Henry Martyn and Abdul Masih that Graham writes about so eloquently, and the different networks that Graham was connected into at that time. Other features of that section are Graham's commitment to finding creative ways of interfaith engagement and his commitment to CMS, the Church Mission Society, with which he and Ali had served in Kenya. Graham waxed eloquent about the mission theology of leading figures in CMS like Max Warren and John V. Taylor, who informed the approach that would later develop as Graham's PhD thesis. It is an approach to mission in the context of other faiths that is biblical, explicitly Christian, but most importantly, Christ-like. Reading these chapters, I realized how much I had imbibed from the approaches of Warren and Taylor myself, and much of that through Graham. When I worked at the Henry Martyn Centre, of which Graham was the founder director, I appreciated his warm, kind, and open attitude. Graham explained his thinking and the way he worked so that I could learn. He gave me confidence that one day, after I got my PhD, I would be leading and doing the same sorts of things that he was. I greatly appreciated the way that Graham always seeks to include people and widen his networks. If he uses an idiom or a technical term, Graham always offers an explanation instead of making outsiders feel excluded. Like Henry Martyn, he is a translator and interpreter, or he is a go-between, like the Holy Spirit in Taylor's rendering. Graham's work and his ministry exemplify the nourishing mission that he writes about, in that it fosters interconnections, introduces people to one another, and creates community. So third and finally, I would like to make some brief observations about the understanding of mission in this book. As it appears throughout the volume, mission is about relationships, and theology is not about ideas, but about people. In my opinion, one of the most profound observations in the book is on page 107. Graham notes that Warren's and Taylor's thinking about interfaith relations was more informed by African than by Asian experience. This set them apart from most of the theologians of religion that Graham was dealing with in the 1990s, almost all of whom used Asia as their laboratory, and more particularly the Indian subcontinent. Graham does not expand further on the significance of this distinctive Africa-informed vantage point, but it is one that he himself shares. In fact, setting 1 shows just how profoundly Graham was influenced by his years in Africa. In that section, he describes a politically engaged, holistic form of religion and patterns of indigenous religion. Furthermore, the African spirituality he presents is biblical, Christ-centered, and relational. For Graham, as for Warren and Taylor, mission and evangelism are incarnational and embodied in the Church Catholic, which, by being itself, is a living witness to Christ. My favorite bit of this book is the poetic expression of a commitment to wholeness and Catholicity in mission on page 58. It epitomizes Graham the poet, his fascination with words and consciousness of their power, and his delight in patterns and creative forms as he shapes his incarnational approach to mission. So I'd like to quote his words on page 58 to conclude. Evangelism rather than propaganda, compassion rather than sentimentality, justice rather than indifference, unity rather than uniformity, urgency rather than hurry, patience rather than complacency, assurance rather than presumption, and hope rather than optimism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirsteen, for kind of drawing out that kind of wonderfully rich approach to mission. We have David Ford up next, if you're happy to come and stand here so that people can see you.
Good. Well, it's lovely to be with all of you out there and here, and also lovely to be. Can you see the wonderful painting behind me? Yes, because that's there it is now. Is that better? That wonderful Sylvia Dimitrova that Graham commissioned, and he's commissioned a whole stream of them actually. So there's more to come for those who haven't seen them all. But well, my forward to this book has already been quoted by Joseph Galgalo, about the energy and encouragement that Graham brings, and also about the connections in many directions. And what I want to do is to just note 3 connections that are personally very important in relation to this book. And I just begin with Joseph Galgalo himself, because it was Graham who introduced Joseph Galgalo to me, and then he came to Cambridge, and I don't think supervised Joseph's doctorate is quite the right thing, because I sat at his feet in many ways, because he was writing on sacrifice and atonement, and brought so much to it that I just didn't know before. But to follow Joseph's career since has been wonderful. And Joseph, if you have visual in Kenya, as we don't have visual of you here, might I just take this opportunity to congratulate you on your whole career, but also most recently, which I haven't had a chance to do in person, on your consecration as a bishop in Kenya. It's been so good to see that. Now, the second connection I want to do is the dedication of the book, because it is to Dan Hardy, and there's that wonderful semper profundiora quaerenda motto that I think Graham has invented it. I say about German theologians that they always, if they have something really important to say, they always put it in Latin, even though it's never been in Latin before. And this, Graham has not only put this in Latin, but also he has it on his house. It's inscribed on his house here in Cambridge in his retirement. And Dan Hardy, I mean, I have a very personal connection there because he's with my father-in-law, but also a very close colleague and friend. And I had that wonderful experience with Dan in my first job in the University of Birmingham, where he taught and he interviewed me for the job. We wrote together my first book after my doctorate. And I just, again, it was just morning after morning of engagement in conversation with a more senior theologian, and what a wonderful learning experience that was. And most recently, there's been this really nice thing of that he is being noticed a bit more and studied a bit more. And most recently, there's a book of 40 Anglican spirituality writers of the 20th century, and that's forthcoming, and Dan is being considered one of those. But the reason I particularly want to mention him now is that he was, with myself and a range of Jews and Muslims, he was involved in the beginning of scriptural reasoning, that practice where one studies with people of other faiths, and one studies extracts from our scriptures together on particular themes. And that has been one of the most moving and surprising things in my life. It links up, of course, with the chapter that I have chosen, which is chapter 6, the one in Mission and the Meeting of Faiths. And one of the people, my third connection, is one of the people who fed into my own understanding of what scriptural reasoning could be, this engagement with scriptures, who is mentioned in that chapter by Graham, Roger Hooker. Now, Max Warren, who was the main subject of that chapter, was the father-in-law of Roger Hooker, and I'm into father-in-law, son-in-law relations, as you could see. And he, after his time in India, he came and lived in Birmingham, and he became godfather to one of our daughters. And he also became the bishop's person for interfaith relations. And I just saw this extraordinary approach to interfaith relations that he had, one patient, long-term relationship after another. But at the heart of all of his engagement was the practice of reading texts with Hindus. And I found that quality of getting as deep as possible into the heart of another faith, that really rang true deeply. And when eventually some of us Christians, Jews and Muslims came together to begin scriptural reasoning, that Roger was one of my patron saints in that practice. And Graham's mention of Roger Hooker has made me go to my library library and take down again some books of Roger. One of Roger's things was that he had a practice that he never read, if he read one book that was contemporary, he read another book. He had to read a matching book, another book from before the 20th century. In other words, he was aware that books got forgotten, really good books got forgotten. And often the contemporary stuff, you know, isn't, I'm not saying that about you, Graham, but contemporary books are not all there is. That you are encouraged to go deeper into history and recover books that might be forgotten. And Roger did this, and I just want to do that for Roger today, because I brought along, first of all, his wonderful book, Themes in Hinduism and Christianity. That was in 1989, so it's the last century. You go through that, and it's a distillation of Christian wisdom, but deeply, deeply in engagement with Hindus on one theme after another. That, you know, on myth, on time, evil, purity, images, renunciation, woman, journey's end. That, and it's marvelous. The other book of Roger's that I want to call attention to in relation to a chapter on interfaith relations is his book, The Quest of Anyaya, a Christian theological appraisal of the search for meaning in his 3 Hindu novels. Now, Anyaya was a Hindi writing novelist, and I had the privilege of co-supervising with Julius Lipner, Roger Hooker's doctorate on this when I was in Cambridge. I didn't know a thing about Anyaya, and there was Roger using all his literary, his religious, his spiritual, his philosophical wisdom in order to engage with these very little known novels and produce this gem of a book of wisdom. So now, when I just compared Dan Hardy and Roger Hooker, what I see is that both of them had this combination of deep attention to texts in conversation with other people and the forming of friendships in that way as well. Because when I think of the practice of scriptural reasoning, I think that it, for me, goes to the heart of what the best sort of interfaith engagement can enable, which is that you go deeper into your own tradition, into your own faith, and you can be utterly Christian or Jewish or Muslim or whatever you are. But you also go deeper into the others, and you're around the same hearth as one of the founders, Peter Oakes, who was a very close friend of Dan Hardy and myself and others in scriptural reasoning, said that you're around the other person's hearth, you're warm, and the warmth of that hearth brings you together. But also you are encouraged to go deeper into the world that we share. And as I look at our world today, and Graham's book exemplifies this in all sorts of ways, we have never been in more need of the world's religious traditions coming together for the sake of the common good of our world. And that is an intrinsic part of what Graham's book is about, it seems to me. And it's wonderful to see that is being promoted so well by Graham and so many others at the moment. Now, I have a final thing about Graham as encourager, which is that I had Graham arrived at my door a few weeks ago. And I had published a book that I've been writing for 20 years on a commentary on the Gospel of John. And it only came out on the 28th of December. But Graham arrives on my doorstep and he had read the whole thing, nearly 500 pages. Now, this was just a friendship beyond imagining. And I just want to say in conclusion that to write a book that someone actually reads is the dream of all of us who write books. And Graham, I very much hope, Graham, that many people will be reading your book. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I forgot to introduce you. I feel that everyone just knows you, but David is, of course, the former Regius Professor in the Divinity faculty here and involved in myriad ways with many charities that probably all of the rest of us are involved in as well. Thank you so much for drawing out those points of connection in your own life and helping us to enter into them more deeply through that. Finally, we have Muthuraj Swamy, the current director of CCCW.
Thank you, Jenny, and hi, everyone. I join you all and those who already spoke before me in congratulating Graham once again for this wonderful book with full of insights. I concur with what others have said already, and I can pick up a number of words, and it's really very interesting. And while talking about the book, I would have to also, talk a lot about my experiences with him. So that is, but I'll try to, not go much into that, but more about I'll try to stick to the book. So Graham has taken talk about, the 5 settings. And what I see is actually while reading the book and also with several conversations with him, one word that comes again and again to me is actually journey, mission as journey. It is not simply being in one place, the movement. He uses the word movement a lot. So it is actually the journey, because in journey it is nobody journeys alone and accompanied accompanied by many people. And as someone who got the privilege to journey with him during the last since 2017 or 2016, so I have learned a lot from him. And as already David said, he is an encourager, and also as he says in his foreword, a lot I can quote from his foreword also. As he says, an encourager and who identifies the talents, and Kirsteen already acknowledges what he said about her, and that has been a personal learning. And in terms of this book, so what I would talk in the next 7 or 8 minutes is about what the book invites us to do. There are so many insights, so much of things that we can learn from the book, but I'll stick to three learning about mission in the light of 2 of his settings. So one setting is Cambridge, the other setting is Lambeth, because these are the settings in which I have got some opportunity to journey with him. So the Cambridge, as the founding director of the Cambridge Center for Christianity Worldwide, what I learned from him and from the book is actually to think about mission and reimagination, because Henry Martin Trust was there since 1881, and we were the center was the trust was equipping Cambridge-based students and public to participate in world mission. But since the 1950s, as we all know, the changes in the world and the changes also invited to rethink mission in new ways. And this reimagination also involved a radical or new courage to do that. And Graham's founding of the center, Cambridge Center for Christianity Worldwide, at that time, Henry Martin Center, really involved that reimagination and courage. And as he says in the book, what happens is sometimes the maps change and the situation changes, but the attitudes don't change. And that really needs reimagination. And the center became a center to do research and study world Christianity and mission in the turn of, since the 1990s. That is actually because of his reimagination to do mission in new ways. And we see that throughout the book. It is not only in the Cambridge setting that comes throughout the book. The second one is, so second and third learning that I want to talk about are from the Lambeth setting. So the mission theology in the Anglican Communion project, in which I was attracted, and while he was looking for an editor for Asia, I was interviewed by him. And what I loved in the project is actually connections. And I mean, it is again in the entire book, and also he published a book, Christianity is Connected, Christianity Connected. And these connections, particularly in the Lambeth setting, what he was doing is bringing together scholars and people from the global north and global south. And that is actually quite appealed to me, because it was also a time I was struggling with the number of polarization, and particularly how we think about mission and world Christianity. Yes, world Christianity and mission has been more explained and understood and done in terms of expansion and growth, moving to another context. And then since 1950s, world Christianity generally understood more in terms of Western interest in non-Western Christianity. And still many, I come across many people approach world Christianity in that way. But what Graham's Lambeth setting, did and does in the book is actually to think about mission as connections. It is actually between global north and global south, and ecumenical and different and interfaith. So different sorts of connections are coming there. And we see now at the center, again, as he's in Cambridge, he's again associated with the center. What we see is that actually how the center can actually bring this world Christianity as connections, that dimension into its work, and he has been hugely supporting what we do here. And so that is mission and reimagination, and mission as connections. And the third one, again in the Lambeth setting, as part of his work, he came to Bangalore, and that was a place where we met in person for the first time. And what I want to talk about here is actually mission in context. It happened that the Bangalore consultation was actually, the theme was mission in context. And obviously this is again a theme that we are familiar with, and that comes again and again through his book very strongly, how we can't do mission in abstract. It cannot be just about ideas, and it's about friendships, it's about relationships, it's about concrete individuals. So mission in context, for me, that that concrete reality and the individuals accommodate. So again, going back to David Ford's foreword, the fateful day. I mean, that phrase always come to me when you get a call on that fateful day from Graham, because I mean, how actually, he brings a lot of things. And just on January 6th this year, I was just having about an hour's chat with him, and I was kind of, when I reflected back, he mentioned about more than 100 people's names, which actually I wrote down, and the names he mentioned later when I came back home. So it is actually in a 1 hour conversation, how many people, and just look at the index in the book, the index of names. He has actually more than 700 people, and some of them are actually historical names, but most of them are current contemporary scholars, and I'm sure many of them are people who is connected. I mean, personally know to him. And so that is actually something I see mission in context is also about people, not just about abstract ideas, or not just about, mission is done in abstract, but it's about personal friendships. And it also invites to think about how we can do in the challenging times in the 21st century, how we can do mission in our local context, not always about moving from one context to other, but mission in everyday life and in the local context. So, and involving concrete individuals. So,
Jenny, thank you very, very much indeed for chairing it so well. It's very good to see so many online and so many here. I was telling Jenny, it feels a bit like being at your own funeral, but I'm actually pleased that I'm still alive. Somebody asked me to write an article about the book, and I did it as an interview, but it was an imaginary interview. And so I invented a character called Q. She was asking me questions. And the first question was, how long does it take to write this book? And I said 34 years. And she said, that's very dilatory. And I explained that it's actually, it's a gathering together of essays over 34 years that have been published. And they're in 5 settings, as has been explained. The first one is Kibari in Kenya, and there's 3 essays there, chapters there. And then Cambridge here, there's 3 chapters. And then Islington, when I was vicar of St Mary's Islington. And then Sherborne, Bishop of Sherborne, and then when I was mission theologian in the Anglican Communion. And I've added a new introduction and a conclusion, but also at the beginning of each chapter, I've added a preface in a 1-page preface in italics, which brings that chapter up to date in bibliographical form and in what people are doing. But I'd like to begin with thanks, and first of all to the panel, to Joseph Galgalo and Kirsteen Kim zooming in, to David and to Muthuraj here. It's wonderful to be in touch again, and I'll say a bit more about that later. But secondly, to the editors of the series, Kirsteen Kim, Steve Bevans, Mika Rukunen, whom Kirsteen has mentioned. And thirdly, to the publishers, Brill, Tessel Yonquier and Ingrid Heikers are both online. And thank you very, very much for producing such a beautiful book. It is absolutely beautiful. And the reason we've got the painting behind is because that's the painting on the book cover. And it's the painting of Sarah and Abraham and the 3 visitors who meet them at Mamre. And this is actually the face of my mother. Sylvia Dimitrova painted this as one of 7 of women in the Bible. And this is the face of my father. And then fourthly, I want to thank friends and scholars who are online and here today. And we've got 61 people online, and we've got about 20 people here today. There are 7 from Kenya online, and there's an extra one from Kenya, Rachel Knighton, who was at St Andrew's College, Kibari. Her father took over from me and is now working in the Federation. And in the USA, we've got 6, plus about 3 present here. We've got Luke Bretherton from Duke and Kathy Grieve from VTS. It's very good to see you. And Joel Carpenter from the Nagel Centre at Calvin. Christopher Wells from the Living Church Institute, who are also co-sponsoring this. And in the Anglican Communion Office, we've got Archbishop Josiah Idowu-Fearon, who's the Secretary General of the Anglican Communion. And it's wonderful that, Josiah, you're becoming a research associate of the Cambridge Centre for Christianity Worldwide. Welcome to you. And to Stephen Spencer, Director for Theological Education. From Rome, Professor Sandra Mazzolini, Pontifical Urban University. And from Brazil, Giorlino Buriti. But I also want to give thanks to God for Daniel Hardy, and David has already mentioned his father-in-law. And this phrase, semper profundiora quaerenda, there are always greater depths to be sought out, which for me, I'm just seeing that Joseph is, yeah, that's fine, okay. Which for me sums up what Dan's thinking is. He always pushes you, and being supervised by him was extraordinary. He would always say, there's a bit more, there's greater depth, just do a bit more. I'm seeing Perrin, Dan's widow, tomorrow to show her the book. What I learned from Dan especially was doing subject indexes. And this is the first time I've ever done a subject index. Dan would say, you write the book, and that's a bit like biblical theology. And then you do the subject index, and that's like doing systematic theology on the very same thing. And I really enjoyed doing the subject index. There's 14 pages of double columns in it. Just to say that there is a discount code for everybody online and here today, and which is 72225. Maybe we can put that in the chat room. And if you use that discount code, it's on the bits of paper you have there. Then instead of £49, it's £37. But to what Joseph and Kirsteen and David and Muthuraj have been saying, the essence of it is that theology is done in friendship and conversation. And that's something I learned from Dan and especially from Dave. And that the best theology is done in friendship and conversation. Owen Chadwick, in his second inaugural lecture in the University of Cambridge, says that you only understand people in the past if you become friends with them through reading their letters, their archives, their books. You can critique them, but you need to be friends with them. And I think that's the essence of mission theology in world Christianity. Joseph is so generous. You're so generous with your time and your thinking and your hospitality. What many people don't know is that the Kabari Passion Play, which is mentioned in one of the early chapters in the book, was written by two students. Albert Cabero was hoping to be with us, I think might well be with us online. He's a professor of New Testament at St. Paul's University, Limuru. Wrote that with Pauline Wanjiru and set it in a context. And I was inspired by John V. Taylor, who did a similar thing at Mukono in Uganda. But it was an extraordinary passion play that related contextually and politically to what was happening in Kenya at that time. And Joseph, you played Jesus, and we've still got photographs of that. And I still remember you coming from Gabra tribe in northern Kenya and playing Jesus at Kabari. But I also remember the month that you stayed in our house in Bermondsey at the beginning of the Mission Theology in the Anglican Communion project, because this whole new project, I sent an email to you saying, I just need some help. Is there any way that you could come and stay? And he said, well, I've got a sabbatical month coming up. And you stayed with us. We went to Durham, we went to Lambeth, and we did some lecturing. But out of that came really the depth of the project, and you presented the first seminar. And then Kirsteen, that's very perceptive, noting that Warren and Taylor both were Africanists coming at interfaith dialogue and a mission from that perspective rather than Asia. And what you and Sebastian did when you were working together in the centre, and especially in Muthuraj Swamy now, you have brought that Asian perspective. And so the Cambridge Centre is being balanced, and through friendship with Giorgino Bariti, the Latin American side is coming in as well. And Kirsteen, you were very generous with your time, and I think your father helped in setting up the very first web page of the centre. And now you're in Fuller with Sebastian. And that is an extraordinary journey, and it bounces back, and you've been the editor in this particular series. The series is utterly extraordinary, and it's worth looking at online. I've got the Brill booklet here. So just going online, seeing the various things that are published by Brill is worth doing. And then David, thank you very, very much. It was very moving in working on the correspondence between Max Warren and Roger Hooker to work with Dan and to have David next door. So father-in-law and son-in-law, again, theology being done in friendship and relationship and conversation. And it was interesting to hear you talk about Roger's influence on you and the text and the friendship discussions and the Cambridge Interfaith Project. And in some ways, I've seen for the first time where that all came from, and your friendship in Birmingham. And I think Roger was godfather to, was it Rachel? To Rachel, that's right. And this idea that really good books get forgotten. Well, it's been published just over a month. But it may be that in 100 years' time, somebody will say, hey, look at this has been forgotten, but we need to look at it again. And the Anyaya book that Roger did, his thesis, was also his TEEP lectures that he gave, organised from Cambridge and in India. And David's commentary on John is certainly worth reading. It is extraordinary. And on your dining room table. We also looked at a few of the misprints, which will be changed for the next edition. Muthuraj, Swamy, it is so extraordinary that Henry Martyn never got back to Cambridge, and he never could marry the woman he loved. He was trying to get back to Constantinople to come and marry her, and he died of TB and riding himself to death at Tokat, which is now in Turkey. And yet we now have an Indian director of the Cambridge Centre for Christianity Worldwide, which was started as the Henry Martyn Centre. And I owe you a huge amount, just as David and I have learned from Joseph Galgalo, so also David and I have learned hugely from you, Muthuraj. And when we first met at Bangalore, and for that mission theology in the Anglican Communion Project, you saw my book Christianity Connected, and you actually said, this is published in the Netherlands, in Europe, it should be published in India. And it's thanks to you. You did the negotiation with ISPCK, and I have great thanks to you for you seeing through the Indian publication of that in 2017. Thank you. You talked about the importance of journey, and you've been on an extraordinary journey. And you mentioned that how maps can change. That's in the last chapter, Maps and Myths Matter. I wrote it as the afterword to Christianity in the Global South, a massive encyclopedia that Mark Lamport edited. I give a quote from Andrew Walls, who is looking at J.H. Eliot, who wrote a book in 1970, The Old World and the New. The discovery of America did not mean that people threw their maps away and got new ones. Still less did it mean that learned people abandoned ideas about humanity and society that were the product of European ignorance of the world beyond their own. In fact, the new discoveries were intellectually threatening, requiring the abandonment of too many certainties, the acquisition of too many new ideas and skills, the modification of too many maxims, the sudden irrelevance of too many accepted authorities. It was easier to ignore them and carry on with the old intellectual maps, and often the old geographical maps too, while accepting the fact of the discovery and profiting from the economic effects. This has also happened, I say, in the history of Christianity, but the tide has turned concerning perspectives, and that book, edited by Mark A. Lamport, 2018, Encyclopedia of Christianity in the Global South, is actually helping that. And Muthuraj, you also mentioned context, and you mentioned index. I hadn't counted the number of people in the name index. I'd begun, Brill were very strict. They said you were not allowed, quite rightly, to use computers in creating an index. And so I did it all personally. You said there were 700, I hadn't realized that. And included in some of those are biblical people. But all mission is personal. And if one thing I learned from Max Warren and John V. Taylor is that all mission is personal, it's done in friendship and in conversation. And the same is true of mission theology and world Christianity. Thank you very much.
Don't sit down just yet, because we need you for a question and answer. So if anyone has, I'm just going to remove the spotlight so that we can all see each other a little better. If anyone has any questions they would like to ask Graham or any of the other panelists about, now is your chance. I'm going to summon Graham back to the camera. And I'll kind of keep an eye on the chat box. So maybe if we start with anyone in the room, then go from there.
Okay, so anybody in the room?
Anything that has sparked you? We have a point of correction in case the chat actually says that it was actually you who made the observation about African Asia.
Oh.
Too generous.
Everything bounces back. Kirsteen, thank you very much. I can see Hannah Briscoe as well. It's very good to see you, Hannah. Hannah's doing a PhD on children of missionaries in Eastern Africa. Yeah.
Thank you very much, for your very good mission. My question is about the voices from Kenyan theologians. So how would you engage with local voices when you write the book Nourishing Mission? How do you engage with them as they engage with local religion?
Okay, thank you.
Would you maybe
So, yeah, so the question is, how did I engage with Kenyan theologians in my writing? Well, I engaged because I was on the staff of St Andrew's College, Kabari, and they were all Kenyan faculty and all Kenyan students. But wider than that, there was St Paul's University, Limuru, where there were mostly Kenyan theologians. And there was also Jesse Mugambi, who's a publisher and a theologian based in Nairobi. And then later on, I came to know John S. Mbiti, and he gave one of the papers in the Mission Theology in the Anglican Communion project, a lecture at Durham University and at Lambeth. And at the age of, I think he was 87, he had just translated the whole of the New Testament into Kikamba, his mother tongue. And so he's one of the fathers of African Christian theology. And Joseph Galgalo, you got to know him very well. And John S. Mbiti left all his papers and archives to St Paul's University, Limuru, where Joseph has been Vice Chancellor for 10 years, just before becoming Bishop. So I was in, but the theologians I was working with, especially with the students, like Joseph, like Albert Kabiro, who's online now, like Winfried Munani, who's online, as well as with Esther Mombo, who's online and was teaching in another college, and I've known in a different context. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments ever in the room or Terry?
This is Terry Barringer, who was librarian of the Royal Commonwealth Society collection in the US. And is an indexer, yes.
Douglas Adams not in the index.
Oh no.
He's in the text.
Oh no, she's Terry Barringer has spotted that Douglas Adams, who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I missed him out from the index. I didn't know that. That will have to be in the second edition.
And Mark. You talk about Douglas Adams and Mark.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
So my question was about.
Let me answer about Douglas Adams first of all. My favourite quote in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is somebody says, "It's uncomfortably like being drunk." And then his friend says, "What's uncomfortable about being drunk?" And he says, "Ask a glass of water." Terry.
So my question started off about language.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you engage in Swahili?
Yes.
And what difference does it make? Writing and doing theology in your heart language.
Terry's asking, did we learn Swahili and Kikuyu, and what difference did it make? I'm tempted, I think I'll ask Ali to come in a moment to say. We learned Swahili first, 3 months in language school in Nairobi. It was really important that you learn the language in the country, not before you go, because you're made to feel like a complete idiot. The best way to learn language is as a child. We became children and learnt it. We picked up Kikuyu in those first 3 years orally. And then when we went back after leave, we had a 1-month Kikuyu course. And many of the words that we thought were 2 words were actually 1 word, and vice versa. I still preach and confirm in Kikuyu. Ali is better at Swahili. Ali, do you want to come and say something? It's important that friends can see Ali as well. You stand exactly right. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Yes, learning the language helped us get rooted into the culture, get to know the culture. The way language is constructed is very different in depending, and tells you quite a lot. So, for instance, in Swahili and Kikuyu, when you're talking about something you do with somebody else, you don't say, I don't say, I went to Kenya with Graham. I say, we went to Kenya with Graham. So you're always talking in community, and the structure of the language tells you that. You don't have to learn that separately. And I think that's a really important thing about language.
David, do you want to?
Ali and Graham, would you like to just reflect on the extraordinary international family you have?
Graham's always boasting about our international family.
Do you want to repeat that?
David's asking about our international family, and we're very pleased and delighted that our middle daughter Miriam is married to a Kikuyu man called Munene, who she knew as a child and got to know again when he came to do postgraduate studies in London. They live in Brighton with their son, who's 2 years old. Ros is married to a British man whose parents are from Sri Lanka, so he's of Sri Lankan heritage. And Katie's partner is a very lovely man from Ilford in Essex, whose mother is Jamaican, whose father is Ghanaian. So
The grandsons?
The grandsons are, yes, there's wonderful grandsons.
We've got 3 wonderful grandsons, all born in lockdown, all born at the same time, who are cousins together. Any questions on?
Keeping an eye online, but
if people want to put up a hand or something online.
to abuse the privilege of the chair.
Yes.
I wanted to ask a bit more about the theology of attention that you talked about. So this idea that we've touched on it a bit in talking about language.
Yes.
And it seems like one of the quite Dan Hardy-ish bits of what you write about, this idea that kind of paying attention is a theological act.
Yes.
I just wanted to hear a bit more about that.
Jen is asking about theology of attention, and this comes in the Max Warren chapter, and that was a phrase of his. He knew the word dialogue, but he wanted it to be not at a stratospheric level, but at a personal level. And he came up with this theology of attention. The first thing you do, Joseph quoted the famous quote, when you meet somebody of another faith, another culture, is you take off your shoes, as Moses did, because you are treading on holy ground. I think that's essential, that you listen and that you engage and that you pay deep attention. Also in that chapter is a very moving extract from a letter that John V. Taylor wrote to me. So I did the draft of the Max Warren and John V. Taylor chapter, which Brian Stanley, who's online, and Kevin Ward edited the bicentenary book of CMS and asked me to do that. And I sent it to John, who was still alive, to check. And he said, this is great. And I asked him about a particular difference between him and Max. And by return of post, it was a handwritten letter. And it was incredibly moving. And I'm just wondering if I can quickly find it. Because I then put it in the CMS bicentenary book, and it's now in this particular book. Yes, let me just see if it's there. Yes, here it is. It's also in a most wonderful book called Love's Redeeming Work, The Anglican Quest for Holiness, which was edited by Rowan Williams, Kenneth Stevenson, and Geoffrey Rao. And it only just got in at the proof stage because I sent it to Geoffrey Rao and he said, this is beautiful, but I'm afraid we have a basic rule that you have to die before you get into our book. And John B. Taylor's still alive. And sadly, he died. And I went to the memorial service at Winchester Cathedral and Geoffrey Rao was there. And he came up to me and said, we're proofreading and we're going to put it in at this stage. So this is John B. Taylor's handwritten letter to me by return of post. The historic Christ, the Logos fully revealed, and this is page 106. The historic Christ, the Logos fully revealed, comes as a story that must be told and an image reflected in other human lives. But he does not come as a stranger. He has been there all along, but his footprints were not on the most frequented paths. And he is recognized as a face seen in half-forgotten dreams, like that of the suffering Messiah foreshadowed in the Old Testament, but neglected in the ongoing tradition of Judaism. He comes to his own in the other faiths in another way also, in that he, the Logos incarnate, once for all in Jesus of Nazareth, matches the need and fulfills the promise of each traditional worldview, as though he had emerged from within it with no less relevance than he did within Judaism. We who stand outside the other traditions may only guess how this may be. Now, imagine my excitement just opening a letter and seeing a handwritten note and this very deep theology from an elder statesman, mission theologian. It's a gift, and we need to thank God, not just to Dan Hardy, but also Max Warren and John B. Taylor.